Before she vanished, Katelyn Markham's life looked like a painting in progress, bright, delicate, and full of promise. A 21-year-old artist with a paintbrush forever tucked in her hair, she was days from her birthday, weeks from graduating, and months from beginning a new life in Colorado with the man she loved. But sometime after midnight on August 13th, 2011, all of that promise collapsed into silence. Her phone went dead, her dog wandered alone, and Caitlyn was nowhere to be found. Fairfield, Indiana, a quiet community where violent crime was almost unheard of, became the center of a frantic search. Posters, vigils, drones, mounted teams, national media, everyone looking for a young woman who would never again step through her front door. But from the very beginning, something was wrong, not with the scene, not with the evidence, but with the story. This is not just a missing person case. It's a story of a relationship slowly collapsing behind closed doors, of red flags ignored, of secrets buried, literally. And it's the story of a family who spent 12 long years waiting for the truth, only to learn that justice, when it finally arrived, would feel almost as cruel as the crime itself. To understand what was lost that August night, you have to understand who Katelyn Markham was, not just what happened to her, but who she was becoming. Caitlyn grew up in Fairfield, a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone. She was artistic, gentle, the kind of person who saw beauty in ordinary moments. Friends described her as soft-spoken, but deeply creative, always sketching, always observing. She had that rare quality of making people feel heard, feel seen. By 2011, at 21 years old, Caitlyn was studying art at the Art Institute of Cincinnati. She was weeks away from graduation, a milestone she'd worked toward for years. Her apartment walls were covered with her paintings, her sketchbooks filled with ideas for a future that seemed, at last, within reach. And that future had a destination: Colorado. Caitlyn and her fiancé, John Carter, had been together for 6 years, since they were teenagers. They talked about starting fresh out west, away from the familiar streets of Fairfield, away from the pressures of small-town life. It was supposed to be a new beginning, but here's where the picture starts to crack. Because while Caitlyn was preparing to graduate and turn 22, her birthday was just days away. Those closest to her were noticing something unsettling. She wasn't excited about Colorado. She wasn't talking about wedding plans. In fact, she'd started confiding in friends that she felt trapped. One friend would later tell investigators that Caitlyn had expressed wanting to break off the engagement, but was afraid of how John would react. She didn't want drama. She didn't want confrontation. Caitlyn was the type of person who tried to slip away quietly, to avoid hurting anyone, even at her own expense. So she stayed. She kept planning. She kept pretending everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. John Carter was described by some as possessive, emotionally volatile, struggling with substance use. Friends noticed scratches on his arms, mood swings, jealousy. His mother was heavily involved in their relationship. Some said too involved, exerting pressure, opinions, financial control. Caitlyn, gentle and conflict avoidant, found herself caught between her own dreams and the weight of expectations she couldn't escape. Still, on the surface, she kept moving forward. Classes, art projects, birthday plans, the countdown to Colorado. Until the night of August 13th, when the countdown stopped. Before we continue, if you're finding this story as gripping as I am, please take a second to subscribe. Cases like Caitlyn's deserve to be told, and your support helps us keep shining a light on stories that might otherwise be forgotten. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? Drop a comment below. Let's build a community of people who care about justice. August 13, 2011 started like any other summer Saturday. Caitlyn spent time with friends, worked on art, made plans for her upcoming birthday. She texted John throughout the day, normal, mundane conversations. But as the evening wore on, something shifted. According to John, he and Caitlyn had plans to spend the evening together. He said he went to her apartment around 11 p.m. They talked. Then, he claimed, he left shortly after midnight to go home. And that's when Caitlyn's phone went silent. At exactly 12:06 a.m., her phone powered off. Or was powered off. No more texts, no more calls, no more Caitlyn. The next morning, John said he tried calling and texting her, no response. He said he went to her apartment. Her car was there. Her dog, Popcorn, was outside, alone, wandering the parking lot, which was unusual. Caitlyn never let Popcorn roam unsupervised. John called 911. "My fiancée is missing," he told the dispatcher. His voice was shaky, urgent. He explained that her phone was off. Her car was there, but she was gone. He said he was worried, terrified even. Police arrived quickly. Fairfield was a small town. This kind of thing didn't happen here. Officers entered Caitlyn's apartment. Nothing appeared disturbed, no signs of a struggle, no forced entry. Her purse was there, her keys, her art supplies scattered across the table as if she'd just stepped away. But Caitlyn wasn't there. And then officers noticed something. John had fresh scratches on his arms and hands. When asked about them, John's explanation was vague, inconsistent. He said he got them from work, from moving furniture, from his dog. The answers kept changing. Investigators also started piecing together the timeline, and it didn't quite add up. John said he left Caitlyn's apartment around midnight, but her phone went dark at 12:06 a.m. So what happened in those 6 minutes? And then there were the text messages, or rather, the lack of them. Friends and family would later discover that several texts between Caitlyn and John from that final evening had been deleted from his phone. Why delete messages if there was nothing to hide? Police began conducting interviews, and the story John had been telling, the story of a worried fiancé desperate to find his missing girlfriend, began to fray at the edges. Still, without a body, without evidence of foul play, without witnesses, the case was treated as a missing person investigation. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she wanted a fresh start. Maybe she just needed space. But the people who knew Caitlyn, really knew her, didn't believe that for a second. She would never leave her dog. She would never abandon her family days before her birthday. She would never walk away from graduation without a word. Something had happened to Katelyn Markham. The question was, what? Within hours of Caitlyn being reported missing, Fairfield exploded into action. Volunteers poured in from across the region. Search teams combed through parks, forests, riverbanks, abandoned buildings. Helicopters circled overhead. Drones swept open fields. Mounted police units searched wooded trails. Caitlyn's face was everywhere, on posters, on the news, on social media. Her family held vigils. Hundreds of people gathered, holding candles, praying, hoping for her safe return. Caitlyn's father, Dave Markham, made emotional pleas to the public. "If you know anything, please come forward. We just want our daughter home." National media picked up the story. Caitlyn's disappearance appeared on Nancy Grace HLN and other crime programs. The pressure was immense. The community demanded answers, and suspicion began to coalesce around one person, John Carter. At first, John played the role of the devastated fiancé. He appeared at vigils, gave interviews, pleaded for Caitlyn's return. But people started noticing inconsistencies. His emotions seemed performative, tears on cue, but no real depth. He avoided certain questions. His timeline kept shifting, and then friends started talking. They told investigators that Caitlyn had been unhappy for months, that she'd confided she wanted to end the engagement but was afraid, that John was controlling, was jealous, unpredictable. that she felt trapped in a relationship she no longer wanted but didn't know how to leave. One friend recalled Caitlyn saying she feared John's reaction if she tried to break things off. Another remembered Caitlyn mentioning that John had a temper, that arguments sometimes turned physical. The portrait being painted was dark and troubling. A young woman on the verge of freedom, held back by a relationship she couldn't escape. And then there was the matter of the polygraph tests. John agreed to take a polygraph. He failed. He took another. He failed again. Investigators pressed him. His story kept changing, small details at first, then larger gaps. Where was he? What time did he leave? Why were those texts deleted? John retained a lawyer and stopped cooperating with police. Meanwhile, the searches continued. Weeks turned into months. Fall arrived, then winter. Still, no sign of Caitlyn. Her 22nd birthday came and went without her. Her graduation ceremony was held without her. And the move to Colorado, the fresh start she'd been both anticipating and dreading, never happened. By the end of 2011, the case had gone cold. Leads dried up. The media moved on. The vigils became less frequent. But Caitlyn's family never stopped searching, and investigators never stopped suspecting John Carter. Still, without a body, there was little they could do. Then, nearly 2 years later, everything changed. April 2013. A man was walking his dog in a remote wooded area in Cedar Grove, Indiana, about 15 miles from Fairfield, just across the state line. The dog wandered off the trail and started digging near a creek bed. The man followed, and what he found made his blood run cold. Bones, wrapped in a blanket, partially concealed beneath brush and debris. He called 911 immediately. When investigators arrived, they carefully excavated the remains. It didn't take long to confirm what everyone feared. It was Katelyn Markham. Her body had been dumped in a shallow grave, wrapped in fabric, and left to decompose in the elements for nearly 2 years. The location was significant. Cedar Grove was remote, wooded, difficult to access, not the kind of place you stumble upon by accident. Whoever left Caitlyn there knew the area, or at least had scouted it intentionally, and it was across state lines, which meant jurisdictional complications, another obstacle in an already difficult case. The medical examiner's report was grim. After 2 years of exposure, Caitlyn's remains were severely decomposed. Cause of death could not be definitively determined. There were no bullets, no stab wounds, no obvious signs of trauma to the bones. But the manner in which her body had been disposed of told a story. She had been wrapped, transported, and hidden. This was not an accident. This was not a suicide. This was homicide. The case officially shifted from a missing person investigation to a murder investigation, and the focus immediately returned to John Carter. But here's the problem. Without physical evidence directly linking John to the crime scene, without a clear cause of death, without witnesses, building a prosecutable case was nearly impossible. Investigators re-interviewed John. He maintained his innocence. He said he had nothing to do with Caitlyn's death. He said he loved her. He said he didn't know what happened. And for years the case stalled. Caitlyn's family was devastated. They'd spent 2 years hoping she was alive, hoping for a miracle. Now they knew the truth. Caitlyn had been dead since the night she disappeared. Someone had killed her, hidden her body, and let her family suffer in agonizing uncertainty. And that someone was walking free. For the next decade, Caitlyn's case languished in a bureaucratic maze. Jurisdiction shifted. The case was transferred to a new sheriff's office. New detectives took over, reviewing thousands of pages of reports, interviews, evidence logs. And slowly, painstakingly, they began building a circumstantial case. They brought in private investigators. They re-interviewed witnesses. They dug into John Carter's background, his relationships, his behavior in the years since Caitlyn's death. And what they found was damning. First, there were the deleted text messages. Forensic analysis of John's phone revealed that he had deleted multiple messages from the night Caitlyn disappeared, messages that might have provided crucial context about their final interaction. Then, there were the writings. During a search of John's home years earlier, investigators had discovered disturbing content, writings about death, violence, control. The exact details were never fully released, but those who reviewed them described them as deeply troubling. John also failed multiple polygraphs, not just once, but repeatedly. While polygraph results aren't admissible in court, they gave investigators confidence that John was lying. Witnesses came forward with new information. Friends of John's described him as volatile, jealous, obsessive about Caitlyn. One former friend recalled John making statements after Caitlyn's disappearance that seemed to hint at guilty knowledge. And then there was the network of people around John, mutual friends, acquaintances, individuals who may have known more than they initially admitted. One of those individuals, a mutual friend, was eventually charged with perjury for lying to investigators about John's whereabouts and statements. Another name that surfaced repeatedly was Jonathan Palmerton, a close friend of John's. Investigators suspected he may have helped John in some capacity, though no charges were ever filed against him directly. There was also Michael Strauss, another associate whose relationship to the case remained murky but significant enough to warrant investigative attention. The picture that emerged was one of a tangled web of relationships, secrets, and lies, all orbiting around John Carter. But still, the question remained, could they prove it in court? This case took over a decade to reach any semblance of resolution, and the journey is far from over. If you're invested in seeing cases like this through to the end, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. And seriously, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. It's incredible to see how far these stories reach and how many people care about justice for victims like Caitlyn. In 2023, 12 years after Katelyn Markham disappeared, investigators finally made their move. John Carter was arrested and charged with Caitlyn's murder. The arrest sent shockwaves through Fairfield. After more than a decade, the case was finally moving forward. But the legal proceedings that followed would prove just as frustrating as the years of waiting. In 2024, as the case prepared to go to trial, John Carter's defense team negotiated a plea deal. Instead of facing a murder trial, John pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter. The courtroom was packed the day of the plea hearing. Caitlyn's family sat in the front row, bracing themselves for whatever came next. And then, the sentence was handed down. 3 years. 3 years. For taking Caitlyn's life, for hiding her body, for letting her family suffer in agony for over a decade. The maximum sentence for involuntary manslaughter in Ohio is 3 years, and John received every day of it. But to Caitlyn's family, it felt like nothing. Caitlyn's father, Dave Markham, stood in court, his voice shaking with grief and rage. He spoke about his daughter's dreams, her kindness, her talent. He spoke about the years of not knowing, the sleepless nights, the birthdays and holidays marked by her absence. And he spoke about the injustice of a 3-year sentence for a life stolen. She was 21 years old, he said. She had her whole life ahead of her, and he gets 3 years. During the proceedings, prosecutors revealed a chilling detail. An inmate who had been incarcerated with John claimed that John had confessed to killing Caitlyn during an argument that spiraled out of control. According to this account, John said the argument became physical, he lost control, and Caitlyn died. Panicking, he wrapped her body and drove across state lines to dispose of it in the woods. John never publicly confirmed or denied this account. To this day, he has not provided a full explanation of what happened that night. In the years since, Caitlyn's family and the Fairfield community have worked to keep her memory alive, not as a victim, but as the vibrant, creative, hopeful young woman she was. They've planted butterfly gardens in her honor, displayed her artwork, and gathered each year on the anniversary of her disappearance to remember her. But the question that haunts them, and haunts everyone who followed this case, is whether justice was truly served. 3 years. For 12 years of lies. For a life taken. For a family destroyed. Katelyn Markham's story is a devastating reminder of how fragile life is, how easily promise can be shattered, and how painfully slow justice can be. It's also a reminder of the red flags we ignore, the warning signs we miss, the moments when someone reaches out for help and we don't hear them. Caitlyn wanted to leave. She wanted freedom. She wanted a future that was hers. And someone took that from her. Today, Caitlyn would have been in her mid-30s. She might have been a celebrated artist. She might have traveled the world. She might have found the peace and independence she so desperately sought. Instead, her story ends in a courtroom, with a 3-year sentence and a family left searching for answers they will never fully receive. Rest in peace, Katelyn Markham. You deserve so much more.